Canada lost an original recently. Rex Murphy passed away at the age of 77. Robert Rex Raphael Murphy, really part of the national conversation on this country, across this country for so many years. Hello, welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host, and the conversation we're going to have today isn't about Rex, although he will factor in. But given that he was, among many other things, a occasional host of the Full Comment Podcast, I wanted to open up for the first episode since that we've recorded since his passing, paying a bit of tribute to him. He, of course, was a longtime columnist for the National Post. Before that, the Globe and Mail. He was the host of CBC's Cross Country Checkup when the show was still vibrant and relevant. And his passing actually will leave a hole in the national conversation, in my view. Chris Selley is joining me today to talk about all things political in Canada, the state of the country. And Chris, I know that you, at one point, had the joy, the pleasure of editing Rex Murphy's columns. What was that like, given that this is a man, great prestige, held in high regard by readers of the National Post, and had such a distinctive voice? What was it like editing this guy?
It was daunting, I think, at first, because what you got from Rex when he would file a column looked to me a lot like a monologue transcribed, right? So it was great writing, but it was also it needed a little bit of work. Sometimes it needed a little bit more than a little bit of work, and and it was so fun. The idea was fun. Editing someone like that is fun, to try and make their columns that people are going to love. They're going to love anyway, to try and make it even better. But with some columnists, they're very averse to edits. They can be very prickly about it. And if you're just thrown in, you never know who those people are going to be. I won't name any names, but I'll say that Rex was the absolute opposite of that. I would sometimes make edits that I thought, oh man, like this is pretty aggressive, just because I thought it made it better, it made it tighter. Readers will read any length of Rex Murphy, I know that, but we only have so much room in the paper. But he would always send it back, no matter how aggressive the edit was or how much I was worried about it. He would just say, "Great edit, Chris. Thanks." And it's just, yeah.
And yeah, without naming names, you and I being in the business know that there are people, if you move a single comma, things will be thrown. Now, I'm not like that, but that's because I like a good editor, and I don't think I'm a good writer. So anything that's going to make it better, I'm all for. But it is great to hear that Rex was like that. My experience with him was a warm man, a generous man, and just a guy who liked to enjoy a good yarn.
Yeah, absolutely. Cross Country Checkup was such an interesting legacy, right? Because he's so opinionated, but he kind of turned that off on Cross Country Checkup. It was like his reporting for his columns in a way. This is the view of the country. And not only would he get the view of the country, he would get to see the views of the country that didn't even make it onto the show, right? So I think he was that to me was him at, not that I didn't enjoy his columns, but to me that was him at his best, was just listening to him interact with people all across the country, because he's so unique and so much of Newfoundland. But here he is talking to everyone from, Chicoutimi to Vancouver Island. I thought that was really cool. I think him at his best, I think.
His last column was published by National Post on May 7th, just days before he died. And what a way to go out. Headline, Trudeau faced an essential moral test after October 7th. He failed it. Our loudly, proudly self-proclaimed male feminist prime minister was silent on the horrid tortures and rapes of Israeli women. And then Rex shows up with receipts, hundreds of words of brilliant writing. And it was people were sending, I was on vacation, I was out of the country, and people are sending me his column before he died saying, "You've got to read this. This is fantastic." So it was a pleasure to know him, however briefly, but he will be missed, and the national conversation will be poor because of his passing. He would have had some interesting things to say about some of the reactions of the Justin Trudeau government of late. And we're going to get to a couple of them. Christy Freeland saying it's not very Canadian to bring up the fact that someone who is, killed a baby and two grandparents, that it's not Canadian to bring up that he's on bail. But first, I want to play a clip here, Chris, of Justin Trudeau being quizzed at a recent news conference. And it's Laura Stone from the Globe and Mail, a colleague of ours from the Queen's Park Press Gallery, with what I think is a very fair question. We've all seen the polls. The polls are horrific for the Trudeau government. The Prime Minister's personal popularity is down. And she just asked him, why are you sticking around? Here's her question and the start of his answer.
Hi, Laura Stone, Globe and Mail. Prime Minister, I want to ask you about leadership. Polls have put you 20 points behind the Conservatives, and it doesn't seem to be getting better despite your recent communications push from your budget. The public appears to have an overwhelmingly negative view of you personally, and you seem to have lost control of the conversation on some of the key issues that Canadians care about. I think the public might be looking at you and your position right now and thinking, for the good of the Liberal Party, why is he staying on?
Thank you for your concern, Laura.
So, he had that smarmy reply off the top, Chris, but then went on a tirade that we're not going to play here about the oil and gas industry. Nothing to do with what was put before him.
No.
But kind of indicative of where this guy's head is at right now. Yeah, the polls are bad, but I don't care because I'm here to save Canada.
It's funny. You use the word smarmy. And I mean, I know, I know when I think Justin Trudeau and the word smarmy, I know of the things that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, thank you for your contribution. Was it?
Thank you for your donation. Yeah.
Thank you for your donation. And I have to say, actually, this one, I kind of laughed. Like, he made me laugh in a good way. Like, his body language was sort of like, because it was a long question, right?
Yeah.
And it was pretty, kind of relentless. Like, it was fair. But when she's saying, like, for the good of Canadians, why won't you step down? And I thought it was kind of funny the way he kind of stepped. He's like, well, thank you for your concern, Laura. Like, I don't know. That actually made me laugh in a genuine way that Trudeau doesn't. But then, as you say, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how many politicians would actually answer that question in earnest. But say something for 15 words, 20 words, 50 words, and then move on. Don't use that as an opportunity to lay out your manifesto for the country. But that's what he does. I mean, everyone talks about Pierre Poilievre and conservatives disdaining journalists. To me, Trudeau disdains journalists most, not with little quips, but by sucking up all the press conference time, talking about just running his gob. Like, just enough already. There's people lined up to ask you questions.
It was a little while ago. I think he gave a 6 or 7 minute answer.
Yeah.
Not related to the question that was put to him.
No. Why? Well, I suppose he would say that everything I just said is about why I wouldn't step down for the good of the country, because who else could possibly spend $40 quadrillion on electric vehicle battery plants? I mean, anyone could do that. Yeah, it was weird. It was like him kind of making a chuckle genuinely in a way that doesn't often happen, and then the same old dreary 7-minute answer.
Well, have you ever been taken on by Trudeau in a news conference for a question that he didn't like?
No, I don't recall him ever reacting badly to a question I asked. I don't tend to ask questions quite that aggressively.
But I just asked because, you say that he's going on about how Pierre Poilievre doesn't treat journalists well. Look, I've been on the receiving end from politicians across the spectrum. You ask them a question they don't like, they will take shots at you. It's part of the game. But Trudeau has this aura that, he's all about journalists. He's all about, a free and fair media. He was announcing, was before he'd come out with details on the what he calls the military-style assault weapons ban.
Right.
And I remember being up north of Toronto, I believe it was Richmond Hill, at a school or something. And I said, why are you targeting these guns that in Canada have no history of criminal use? And this is before Portapique. And I think there was one case of criminal use that I could find in the archives, and it was an illegal purchase, part of a mafia attempted hit. And Trudeau just went off aggressively, basically scolding me of how dare you ask these questions. I mean, that's, politicians of all stripes can do that, but he seems to believe that he is above that. He's definitely not above the Canadian public right now. They appear to be done with him. How are you reading what's going on with the polling, the Canadian public, and then, these internal liberal attempts to decide who will replace him? Freeland, Dominic LeBlanc, Mark Carney.
I mean, to me, it's too late, surely, to replace him with someone else. And a terrible idea, I would think, at this point. I can see why people would want to, but my next question is who would really want to pick up the baton at this point, knowing that it's almost certain defeat one way or the other. I mean, you never know, but Dominic LeBlanc, Mark Carney, I mean, these are not natural. These are not the sort of people you would expect to fly into a situation that's this dire and somehow turn things around. Certainly not Chrystia Freeland, although polls suggest, I mean, that's my opinion, but polls suggest she's the most.
I think that's name recognition. I think people go, oh yeah, I've heard her name. I believe polling on things like who would you vote for, and the rest of it. Sometimes I think it's just what, people react to what they think or what they heard. There was one poll about the recent Trudeau Liberal federal budget, and it said, what did you not like about it? And 20% said they spent too much time on deficit reduction. And I thought, well, there's no deficit reduction, so I don't think you read the budget and you just click something to make yourself feel better.
Yeah.
And I think they do that with names that they're like, I don't know, but I've heard of that person.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that Chrystia Freeland's popularity would go down the more people listen to her, frankly. She seems to share with Trudeau just some really terrible instincts.
Like about talking to adults like they're children?
Yeah. And just tonally, like you said about Trudeau, where he just went off at you. Like I think he does, when he does that to me, it always looks very calculated. But the calculations are wonky. Like it just doesn't, he doesn't get angry at the right time, and he's not sort of relaxed at the right time. So to me, that just indicates that he is completely out of touch. And that's what everything basically that comes out of the PMO's office suggests is that they're just flailing and they don't know what to do except more of the same. Attack. Harder.
Well, I mean, look, Justin Trudeau's the only one that can save the country from Diagolon. Is that the group?
Yeah, well, Pierre Poilievre and all his horrible alleged hangers-on, who in this case he absolutely despises and is called dirtbags and losers. I mean, it's one of the most ridiculous narratives I've seen take shape in Canadian politics recently. It's all based on like a 3 inch by 3 inch drawing of a flag on the inside of an RV that he probably didn't even see,
of a group that people don't know about. Yeah, but I agree. The like most people don't know who Diagolon is. I don't really know who they are. Why? Yeah, they've been in the news. I don't care because they are not relevant. They have no power. They hold no sway except within their group. Okay, but it's a small group of people in an online community. I don't get involved in the internal workings and arguments of Pinterest fan clubs. So I'm not going to get involved in this.
There's some ugly stuff that goes on in the Diagolon universe. Really, really ugly stuff. Threatening to rape journalists. Well, I shouldn't say threatening. Talking about raping journalists. Talking about raping Pierre Poilievre's wife.
Which is why he called them dirtbags and losers.
Exactly.
And the
global Jewish conspiracies. I mean, but and there's always the possibility that someone could fly off the handle who's in this universe. But that doesn't mean that they're any kind of mortal threat. Anyone could fly off the handle based on anything they find online. So no, it's a completely silly thing, and I think it's just evidence that I mean, they supposedly brought in all this new blood at the PMO, right? It's exactly the same dreck that comes out of it. If anything, just harder.
Good word, dreck. I like it.
It's bizarre.
We've seen the overall polling, right, of Conservatives leading in every part of the country except Quebec. They lead in every age, income demographic, every educational demographic. And now Angus Reid did something interesting. Angus Reid Institute did a poll, 3,000 people, shows a 20-point lead for the Conservatives nationally, so very in keeping with what we've seen already. But then they did something nobody else has done. They broke it down by religious faith or identity. You know, which religious group are you practicing or do you identify with? And 54% of Catholics say that they are going to vote for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives. The Catholic vote used to be, I remember one campaign manager years ago telling me, in Ontario, we've got Catholic schools, and they said, get me a copy of the Catholic School Board voters registry, and I'll tell you where to put all my signs. And, I know that over the years that has been broken a bit, but it's still one of the most reliable groups. Over 50% of Sikhs, 50% of Hindus, 50% of other Christians, the plurality of Jews in Canada, all say that they're voting Conservative. The only group that they're not leading with are Muslims, and they've gone to the NDP. They've abandoned Justin Trudeau as well. Back to Laura Stone's point, for the good of your party, for the good of the country, why don't you step down?
Yeah. Well, and what's the answer? What would be the honest answer? No one's going to do any better. I'm going to go down with the ship. That's not the sort of thing that politicians generally say. I mean, the Muslim vote is a fascinating one because, to me, it wasn't so long ago that we were seeing some really interesting convergence on conservative issues between conservative Christians and conservative Muslims, like in terms of the parental rights discussion, all kinds of very broadly speaking, socially conservative issues. And now,
until the war happened,
and then October 7th, and that's amazing. Like from what I've seen, that really did splinter whatever coalition was building there. And I guess if that's your number one issue or one of your major issues, and you're not going to vote, and there's lots of reasons not to vote Liberal, no matter which religion you're from, you're just sick and tired of the guys. You're probably not going to go for the guy who's the heaviest in support of Israel. So it's a fascinating dynamic.
Do you think that there's been a lot of commentary on Pierre Poilievre's peak too soon, but some of that is from the same people that said Pierre Poilievre was done last December, and then his numbers only went up. Oh, he had a really bad week. Steve McKinnon, the Liberal House leader, told me he had a really bad week. It's over for the Liberals or for the Conservatives. But I mean, how do you sustain this? Because I don't see us going to an election before October 2025 now. You've got all those MPs, not just Jagmeet Singh, but there's 80 some odd MPs. 30 odd of them are, I believe, Bloc, Liberal, or NDP, who are awaiting their pension. They've extended the voting day, a week later, so that they can all qualify for their pensions. So there's no way these guys are voting against their pensions. It's like, turkeys voting for Christmas dinner. Not going to happen. So how hard do you see it being for Poilievre to sustain a significant lead over that time?
I mean, it's an interesting question. It's an interesting strategic question because he really has one gear, right? He just goes. Is there a possibility that going for months after month after month after month after month might, people don't like politicians in their face too much, right? No matter how much they might like the politician. And I'm not suggesting he should take his foot off the gas or anything, but it might be worth showing us some other people in the party a little bit, just calming down a little bit. I don't know, but these are just personal preferences, right? That doesn't mean that
Jean Chrétien famously was all about not being in your face because his view was that voters don't want to see their elected leaders all the time. So Chrétien's view was the less he was on TV, the better. And you know who adopted that from Chrétien? Stephen Harper.
No, yeah, absolutely. The ultimate not to be. Yeah, it's true, right? People always compare Poilievre to Harper, but in that sense, they're very different.
So I was a local radio reporter in Ottawa when Pierre Poilievre was first elected. And he used to call the radio station trying to get into every story there was. And I remember answering the phone one day and I said, "Oh, look, we can't have you commenting on everything. Thanks for the call." And he has learned to temper some of that. But, you know, your comments there reminded me that he is a go guy. And he may need to just be quiet for a little while. I mean, it's not like Trudeau's doing himself any favors. He doesn't need to be out there.
He's sealed the deal with, I mean, he might not have sealed the deal with 43% of the population or whatever it's saying now, but it looks to me like he sealed the deal with enough people to win for sure. So maybe you don't want to, it's tough. You've done that way in advance of the election date, as you say. So I don't know. I think people are sick enough of Trudeau right now that they would vote for any conservative leader. No offense to Poilievre. It's so yeah. I don't know. It's. I could see people advising him to take it down a gear, but then he doesn't seem to have surrounded himself with people who would say things like that. From my observation,
the old World War I propaganda poster, "Attack on all fronts." That comes to mind. The Toronto Star has a piece out from Susan Delacourt attacking Poilievre, saying he's going to take away some of your rights. And I find this an interesting thing. There's not a big surprise that what Delacourt's writing mirrors what is coming out of the PMO. But their push is he's going to take away your rights. And this is because Poilievre has said that he would be open to using the notwithstanding clause if judges strike down any of his tough on crime legislation. So far, he said he's only going to use it for serious violent criminals. Do you think that the general public cares about the government overruling judges that constantly are saying, no, you've got to give this consideration and that consideration and let the criminal out sooner? I think that there would be a cross-party consensus among everyday voters to say, yeah, lock the SOBs up.
Yeah, I think on that issue, and I think that's when he talks about Alexandre Bissonnette, who is the Quebec City mosque assassin, and the fact that the court overturned his sentences as being longer than his natural life could be, and therefore it was, cruel and unusual punishment, and Canadians would be appalled. I can't read the exact language, but it literally said this would offend the Canadian conscience or something like that. No, it wouldn't. You're 180% degrees wrong.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great example of where the notwithstanding clause should be on the table and should just be slapped down without apology. I do think, and I don't know what I'm basing this. I'm thinking of polls that I've seen sort of out of Quebec on sort of cultural issues, that it does seem to me that people have some trepidation about the idea of politicians just overruling the courts. And when I hear Poilievre talk about it as sort of almost like an "I will do this," not "I will do this if necessary," but more like, he's talking to the chief of police, I think. He's saying, all my laws will be constitutional because I'm going to make them constitutional using the Constitution. And I think you know what I'm talking about. I don't want the notwithstanding clause used on principle. I want it used. I don't want it used just for the sake of using it. I want to know it's going to be used when it makes sense. And I don't understand why Poilievre would rule it out except in cases of criminal law. There's lots of, I mean, some of the most unimpeachable uses of the notwithstanding clause have been outside of the realm of criminal law. So that was a weird one, I thought.
People were asking me why Doug Ford used the notwithstanding clause on back to work legislation for education workers a little while ago. And, I've also received a ton of emails saying, these guys should be made essential workers. They shouldn't be allowed to strike. The reason that he had to use the notwithstanding clause is that a couple of years ago, Rosalie Abella on the Supreme Court said the time has come to recognize this as a right. Well, she didn't use a legal argument.
Yeah.
She actually overturned decades of precedent established by courts that were at times liberal, at times conservative, and just said, the time has come. Well, why?
Yeah.
And so she overturned decades of precedent, and she made a major imbalance in the system. That's where you would use the notwithstanding clause, as an example of outside of criminal justice. Chris, we should take a quick break here because I'm over time. But when we come back, I want to talk about other crazy court rulings, including on the encampments. Apparently, McGill University cannot remove campers from their own property. More when we come back. We've seen the encampments pop up across North America. They started in the United States, and then, of course, we had copycat encampments on university campuses across Canada. What's fascinating to me, Chris, is that people who were all about cracking down on the Freedom Convoy in 2022, who said you can't just set up a place to live, you can't camp there, are suddenly defending this. And we now have a court in Montreal. McGill University went to the courts and said, we want an injunction to remove these people from our property. And the court said, no, you don't have the ability to do that.
Maybe they shouldn't have asked.
I think they should have just called the police from Calgary to do the job. Can we fly you
Quebec,
in?
Yeah. Well, Quebec police are generally among the most willing to bust heads when it comes up to this. Not that I'm suggesting heads should be busted, but
let's not stereotype just based on past experience, Chris.
It's like the way you put it is good, because there are so few people who are consistent about this. Like, this is what makes it so difficult to have this discussion when you have literally you take the number of people who have strong opinions about the convoy and about the encampments, and as you say, they'll talk your ear off for an hour about how different they are. That the one thing has nothing to do with the other. And of course, it's the exact same thing. I mean, they're not in the middle of downtown, to be fair. One thing I find funny about the U of T encampment is that it's essentially invisible to anyone who doesn't go looking for it, or doesn't work on campus, or doesn't go to school on campus.
Or walk their dog through there like I do.
Yeah, or there you go. Or walk your dog through there. But it's not the full-blown crisis that Ottawa was, but it is.
Look, I was a long-time Ottawa resident. That was not the crisis that it was made to be, except that in my view, part of the reason that it was amplified the way it was it inconvenienced the National Press Gallery, who worked down there. I mean, I think
I'd live. Yeah,
I know you're laughing. Well, no, most of them live in Westboro, quite a good distance away. True. Better restaurants in Westboro. And but they would, or the Glebe, but it inconvenienced them at their work, and that's why it became a thing. And now we've got CBC, which went out of their way to show that the convoy was horrible. And by the way, I'm on the record. The convoy should have been removed from the first weekend they were there. You can't camp on Wellington Street,
no, exactly.
Just like you can't camp on U of T. Yeah. So you and I are two of the people who are consistent on this, but they. The National Press Gallery was just outraged that these dirty people were in their way, and how dare they? And I think that informed a lot of the coverage of it. And now, as you say, well, this is just on campuses, so unless you're going through, you're not seeing it. But in downtown Montreal, it's tough to go by McGill and not see it.
Yeah, for sure. It's and these are publicly. I mean, there's some gray area about how much a university is public property and how much of it is private property. But the fact is that these are publicly funded institutions. People, students, faculty are there We want them to be there. We subsidize these universities for them to be there. Why are we letting this rabble take over? However righteous their cause, this it can't. It's untenable, and I feel like it's building, right? Like it's building from. I don't think that the encampment people have taken any notes necessarily from the Ottawa convoy people, but the fact is that this keeps happening, right? And the more we don't do about it, the more we accept that you can just park yourself wherever you want if your cause is righteous. The worse it's going to get. Like, someone has to draw a line, and apparently it's not judges.
I was actually quite surprised by the judge's ruling on this, and I think it's a horrible precedent. But then again, I think that about an awful lot of judicial rulings. We have this mistaken belief in Canada that our courts are not political. And anyone that spends any time reading court rulings can see the politics at play. Look, we all come to how we view things with a particular mindset, a worldview. And that informs how we would rule on something if we were in that position. How you can tell a university that you don't have the right to remove people from living on your property is beyond me. But I was down at U of T the other day, and a group called the Council of Muslims Against Anti-Semitism was trying to bring in a truck. They wanted their truck to be on the U of T campus, and U of T was saying, "No way, Jose, you're not getting on there." The truck was one of these ones with a video billboard on the side, and it was playing a clip on loop of a Palestinian man from Gaza who wrote a piece in Newsweek saying, "Stop glorifying Hamas. Hamas is horrible for the Palestinian people. I can't believe how many people in the West don't know this." U of T would not allow that on there, but they allowed trucks onto campus to drop off porta potties for the campers. So they now have professional porta potty facilities for them that are obviously emptied at some point. So trucks can get in for that. But, don't dare bring a divergent point of view. McGill waited too long, and they mistakenly went to the courts. University of Calgary did it right. They just cleared them out the first day. You're not camping here. But U of T is negotiating with these guys and trying to make it seem like this is the right way to do it. We don't want to be like Calgary. We don't want to use the police. And if we just appease these guys long enough, everything will be fine.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you could argue, one could argue that so the protesters at U of T, like, they have this, their narrow point. Some of them will tell you is, we just want the university to disclose its investments and divest from anything in Israel. Now, of course, their demands go on from there to include, no association with Israeli universities. Well, hang on, what? Like, what does that have to do with anything? But it's turned into this huge thing. Like, if they can't claim that it's grassroots, I think that's one of their credibility problems. That doesn't impact their rights necessarily, or the lack of their rights to occupy a public space. But this is clearly, not just a student movement, not just looking to divest for the university to divest itself. It's the organized anti-Israel mashup.
There are more Palestinian flags in that one little area of U of T than there are Canadian flags across the campus. And it's not like they don't fly the Canadian flag at U of T. They absolutely do. I'm not criticizing them for that. But those flags, there were dozens and dozens of flags brought in. And they weren't brought in by students. The video was posted online by the groups doing it. I think they said they were going to bring 100. I don't think there's 100 up there right now. Maybe I have to go back and count. But these were professional organizers, protesters who have been at the McGill encampment, at the U of O encampment, at the U of T encampment. These aren't students at any of these schools.
Yep.
But don't worry, we've got CBC telling us everything's fine, and it's just a trope of the right wing to say that there are outside agitators involved.
Yeah,
I'm not saying there is outside agitators involved. The outside agitators are posting it on Instagram.
Yeah. What's Cupid doing there? What does that have to do with anything? I mean, it's really frustrating, and it makes it. And when even the media can't, I say even the media, but I mean when even media can't even try, it looks to me, to be consistent about these things. That just makes it all the worse, because it reinforces this instinct that we have to excuse things from people we like and causes we like, and there's no way that's never going to resolve itself unless someone draws a line in the sand and says, this is what you can do and this is what you can't do.
If you're consistent with the rule of law, then you're going to be fine. And
except that everyone will still claim you're not being consistent, but at least you can claim righteously to have been consistent.
Speaking of excusing things that you don't like, Chrystia Freeland, Trudeau's deputy prime minister, finance minister, was asked recently. This is a news conference where Trudeau showed up, did the whole announcement, and then walked out without answering a single question. And bizarrely, there was no protest from the media to walk out, as would happen with other politicians. But Freeland took the questions, and she was asked about the man, I'm forgetting his first name, Mr. Singh, who is the guy who was trying to avoid arrest by police in Durham region, just east of Toronto. He's in a rental van after it's not clear if he actually did rob the LCBO or attempted to rob the LCBO, but he gets in a van, evades police for a while, and ends up going through the wrong way on the 401. A baby and 2 grandparents were killed. Turns out this guy was out on bail, not once, but twice. So Chrystia Freeland's asked about it, and she says it's not very Canadian to bring that up. That was jaw-dropping to me. What's your reaction?
I would say it would be jaw-dropping. It would have been jaw-dropping 9 years ago. But this is who this government is. I mean, I recall the incident where the Conservatives were complaining about Terry Lynn McClintock being the murderer of 8-year-old Terry Stafford being transferred to an Indigenous healing lodge that had no security. And I believe it was at that point that Justin Trudeau sprinted out of the Commons towards waiting reporters to say that they were ambulance chasing politics. He saw an advantage there in standing up for a killer. It's an example of just absolutely terrible instincts and just pure arrogance in terms of we mustn't talk about that, and it's just so Canadian in so many ways.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if she was trying to avoid talking about this guy's past because Singh was in Canada as an international student from India, and I thought, well, is she trying to imply that to ask about this is somehow racist? Well, the 2 grandparents that he killed were visiting from India. They had come from India to see their grandchild, just 3 months old. They're driving along with them in the car, probably proud as punch. And this guy kills them. So, there's no race factor in here. There's no bigotry. Why are you standing up for a guy who just killed 3 people?
It's interesting. My mind didn't even go there when I heard it. But that now that you say it, I can see that instinct sort of creeping into a liberal mind. Like, ooh, this sounds a bit dodgy. He wasn't white. This is probably racist. I don't know. We get the idea of Chrystia Freeland replacing Justin Trudeau. I mean, does that sound like a viable replacement? Someone who would stand up there and say that we mustn't talk about bail conditions for, I mean, the fact is that guy probably would have been out on bail anyways.
Well, I mean, they're saying that they've done bail reform. They have and they haven't. They've done it for repeat convicted offenders. But this guy was out on bail for a series of robberies, including violent one. And then he breaches his bail conditions by doing exactly what he was out on bail for. And they give him bail again. Why? Because the law still says that for guys like that, even after their bail reform, you are supposed to release them as soon as possible under the least onerous conditions.
And meanwhile, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases get thrown out because the justice system can't process the trials quickly enough. I mean, to me, the whole justice system needs a top-to-bottom examination and revamp. That incident brings up so many contemporary issues in Canada. Like, we shouldn't try to stop shoplifters. We shouldn't try to stop theft. It's not worth it. And like at a certain point, people get sick of that stuff because that's what cities look like now. It's a bunch of people not sweating the small stuff, except the small stuff keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Which brings us full circle to the polls. And we have not solved all the problems of the world, but it's been a fun conversation while we've been doing it, Chris. Thanks so much for the time today.
Thank you, Brian.
The Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue with theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Remember, you can subscribe to Full Comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you get your podcast. And help us out by giving us a rating or leaving a review. And tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.